Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to change the brake pads and rotors on a second gen 2-wheel drive Dodge Ram. Let's get started. The brakes I'm going to be putting on today are Power Stop Extremes. This kit comes with all the pins and all the hardware along with the brake pads and the rotors. The part number on these are Z36702. You just make sure you're getting the right pads and rotors for your truck. Alright, for this project, you're going to need a breaker bar to help break loose any of those rusted bolts that you might have. A socket set with some socket wrenches. You're going to need standard and metric. At least on mine I did. My lug nuts are 19 millimeter. You're also going to need a 13/16. And then for the 2-wheel drive, you're going to need a 6 millimeter hex socket. You'll probably end up having to separate the pads from the rotors, so you're going to need a pry bar or just a flathead screwdriver, a torque wrench to make sure everything's torqued to spec. You're also going to need a C-clamp. This is going to be used to push the calipers back in the pistons. You're going to need something to jack the truck up with and some jack stands. I also recommend having a couple buckets nearby that's going to help you rest the calipers on the bucket instead of letting them dangle down. It's also a good idea to use a penetrating lubricant on all your bolts before you start, and use some brake and caliper grease on any metal contacting points. I'll leave a link down in the description of all the parts and tools that I used today. Alright, so the first thing we do is we're going to break the lug nuts loose. So she's using a breaker bar and a 19 millimeter socket. So you're not going to take them all the way off, you're just going to break them loose. Which is just easier to do when the tires are on the ground. Alright, so I got it jacked up. Now I'm just going to take all the lug nuts off and take the tire off, just make sure it turns. That way you know it's off the ground. You can use a socket. I'm going to use a drill, an impact drill. If you have one, you can use that. Just makes it a lot faster taking them off. And that just comes off, and just remove your tire. Roll it out of the way. Alright, so once you got it jacked up, go ahead and turn the wheel all the way to the left if you're doing the right side, or the right if you're doing the left side. This is just going to give you better access to the back side of the caliper. So we're going to be taking off this little hex bolt right here. This is a size 6 hex, and then millimeter, 6 millimeter, and there's gonna be one right here and one down here. It's also a good idea to have something here handy just to be able to put to rest your caliper on. You don't want to let the weight of this pull on this line, it could damage it. So just make sure you have something nearby. You can use a zip tie to zip it up, or just have something for it to sit on. It's also a good idea if you have penetrating fluid to spray some on there before you work on them. I sprayed on a couple hours ago just because I knew I'd be out here today working on this. So I'm just going to use a breaker bar, just wiggle it back and forth a little bit until it comes loose. There we go. Just take your time so you don't strip anything out, and then do the bottom one. That. I'm going to use a ratchet just to finish taking them all the way off. Pull your screw like that. There's also some little rubber boots on here, but my kit did come with some, so I'll be replacing those today. Okay. Alright, so next we're going to take off these lower bolts. These are 13/16 regular socket. Definitely, probably will need a breaker bar if these haven't been changed in a while. I know, I've never changed them. So, could have been on there for a while. Okay, now I'm just gonna use my wrench for the rest of it. Okay, there's one. Be careful when you take the last bolt out, because it might drop on you. Just make sure you have something under to hold it. So if it doesn't come right off, you'll have to pry in between here and move the pads away from the rotor just a little bit so we can slide them off. So, but first what I'm going to do is put a nut on here just to keep this from wobbling around. And that just keeps it from moving around. So what you're going to do is just try to separate the piston from the rotor. So just push it back in a little bit. Pry bar or a screwdriver. That's all you need. Okay. Once it's loose enough, you should be able to just wiggle it right off. Okay, just like that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this on the bucket. So, like that. Slide that away for a minute. Just make sure that your hose isn't hanging or anything. Go ahead and remove your nut from your old rotor. Just pull the old one off. Okay. Alright, so once you get the rotor off, you just always want to make sure that you have the right rotor. And to do that, you just basically just put them next to each other. So you want to make sure that they're the same height, same thickness. It should also be the same width around. Okay. So just want to make sure that it's level all the way around. Just these look good. And you also want to make sure that the height of them are is the right on the opposite side. So we're going to flip them over. Make sure they line up. And then make sure that they're also the same thickness. And these look like they're good to go. Since these are drilled and slotted, they do have specific sides they have to go on. So this one, as you can see, goes on the front passenger side. So next we're going to put on the rotor. So just get it on, line up your holes. Alright, so next we're going to be working on putting the new pads on. So we're just going to separate it from the lower piece. Alright, so then you're left with is this. Alright, so these old pads just slide out of these pins right here. Just slide right out. Yeah. This one still had a little bit of life on it. This one, the entire pad was gone. It was making a lot of noise. That's why I'm changing my brakes today. Alright, so next we're going to be compressing the pistons back in the calipers. So I'm just going to take a piece of wood, stick it on like that, and use a C-clamp to push them back in. Just turn it until they push all the way back in. Just do it nice and slow. I might have to go back and forth a couple times just to get them equaled out. Okay. Alright. So as you can see, both pistons are now pushed all the way in, and now they're going to slide much better onto the new rotor with the new pads. Alright, so I got all this cleaned up. I used a rust preventative on the actual A-arms and all the suspension under here. I use POR 15. I use this stuff on all of my truck. I've already done most of the rear of the truck and the frame. So since I had this off, I figured I'd go ahead and clean it up. I took my drill and a wire brush and I just cleaned it up really good. Took some sandpaper to the calipers and some of the flat spots. And I'm just applying the POR 15 to it. You don't have to do this. This is just for preventative measures, since I do use my boat a lot for pulling the boat and I'm in and out of salt water. So I just want to make sure that the truck will last as long as it can. There are these push sleeves that are in here, so you just pop it off like that, and then these just slide straight out, and you can just pull them off. Yep. And then you just slides right out like that. And there's one on both sides, so I'm gonna take that one out too. All right, so next I'm gonna be installing these little booties. These go back inside these little holes right here. And they're the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter how they go on. Stuff in there like that. That, and you just pull them through. That. That just allows that pin to slide back and forth, and do the same thing on the other side. Get them both on, and you're going to slide your pins in, and we'll put a little bit of grease inside just so they move freely. Alright, so I'm just using brake and caliper grease, so I'm just going to be putting a little bit of that on the sleeves. Don't need a lot. I'm only going to do about half of it. That way, as I push it down in there, it'll go in all the way. Just get that started. Once you get started, just push it all the way through, slides in, get it lined up with the hole. Okay, push it in. And then you want to make sure the back side also clips into that little ridge on the rubber part, like that. And what that should do is slide back and forth, very easy. And you'll do the same thing on the other side. The grease, you don't need a lot. Okay. Once you get it in, slowly spin it in. Push it through. Comes out the other side, and then just wrap it over that little lip. Make sure it moves back and forth. Alright, next we'll be putting the clips on the new clips on the calipers. And they're different sizes, so you'll see that only one side will go on one side. Just get it lined up on there. Just clip on like that. To the other side. Just gonna make sure they're seated all the way. Take a little bit of your grease. Don't need a lot here. So take your pads, put a little bit of grease on them. You don't want to get any grease on the actual pad, but the metal parts where it contacts the metal. This will prevent it from squeaking. One on this side. That. And then we'll do the other side. And grease. Yeah. Alright, so next one we'll be mounting the rotor back on. Just get it lined up. I'm going to use my little trick with the nut. Just keep it falling off there. It just keeps it tight so you're not fighting with it. Once you get it, then we're trying to get the rotor back on. Okay. Alright, so now you're going to be installing the new pads. Okay, once you get it positioned, these just clip back in. On that clip down in there. I don't know if you can see it. You just kind of push it down. And put this down. Okay, it just clips into place like that. Okay, and then you're going to flip it over and put it on top of your rotor. So make sure when you turn it over that your hose is not bound up at all. And make sure that it's straight. So carefully turn this back over. And then line it up with your holes. So we'll take a screw, same screws you took out, put them back in. So I got that started. So just replace the bolts just like you took them off. I'm going to torque these down once I'm done. Once I torque these down, these have to be 130 foot-pounds. Next we're going to torque the lug nuts down to 110 pounds torque. Alright, before you actually move the truck, you want to make sure you push the brake pedal just a few times and get the fluid back down into the lines. Make sure those pistons expand onto the rotors, and you're good to go. Alright, well that's how you install brake pads and rotors on a second gen Dodge Ram. It should be the same for all years 94 to 2001. If you found the video helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And as always, thanks for watching.